Right, so Henry Fowler said that there are basically 5 kinds of people in the English-speaking world. There are people who don't know about split infinitives and don't care about them. There are people who don't know about split infinitives but do care about them. Then there are people who know about split infinitives and disapprove of them. And people who know about split infinitives and approve of them. And then you've got people who know when to use split infinitives and when not to, and that's the kind of person that we're going to be by the end of today's video. What's up? It's WJROK, and if you're new here, my name's Will, and I'm an editor and English professor based in South Korea, and today we are going to boldly go where many grammarians have gone before, but with a twist. Not only are we going to find that it's totally okay to split an infinitive, but we're also going to think critically about how to best use them, see what I did there, to improve your writing style. As I was producing this video, I got kind of stuck in the weeds on a technical point about split infinitives, so I reached out to Steven Pinker, the renowned linguist and cognitive scientist at Harvard, and he really helped put things into perspective. So if you want to hear Dr. Pinker break it down for us about split infinitives, definitely stick around for that. So, you want to know how to best split infinitives. Oh, I think you mean how best to split infinitives. Ah, yes. That guy. You know that guy. You've met him at parties before. He's the guy who loves to point out that in the introduction to the TV show Star Trek, which says that the mission of the space crew is
to boldly go where no man has gone before.
There's a serious grammatical error, the split infinitive. This guy is fond of hearing himself say that the introduction should actually be to go boldly where no man has gone before. First of all, that guy probably shouldn't be invited to parties, but if you do find yourself in his company again, then this video is going to show you how to shut him down. Because it turns out that there's actually nothing in grammar or popular usage that prohibits the use of split infinitives. On the contrary, there are many times when you should use a split infinitive, and some cases when you must. And when you get to the bottom of it, there's actually no such thing as a split infinitive. So what is a split infinitive? Well, for starters, an infinitive is just the plain form of the verb attached to the subordinator to. So for example, to read is an infinitive and to play is an infinitive. These look like verbs, but in a sentence, they function as a noun. So for example, in the sentence, she wants to read is an object. It's the thing that she wants. Sometimes we want to give more information about an infinitive, about its time, place, manner, or quality, and we do that by connecting it to a modifier. But in that case, you've got an interesting decision to make. Where do you put the modifier? Do you put it before the infinitive? After the infinitive? Or how about right there in the middle? That middle position is what's called a split infinitive, but it's actually a misnomer. When you put a modifier in the middle position between the subordinator to and the verb, there's not actually anything being split. This idea that placing a modifier in the middle of an infinitive causes some split is based on a false analogy with Latin. A long time ago, early linguists loved Latin, and they thought that it should be a model for English. In Latin, the infinitive is just a single word, so it's actually impossible to split the infinitive. You've got to place the modifier either before or after the infinitive. But the analogy between English and Latin doesn't work because Latin is a synthetic language, which means it expresses grammar through changes to the verb. Whereas English is an analytic language, which means it expresses grammar through word order. So in Latin, the split infinitive is impossible. But in English, the infinitive is made up of 2 words, and you can totally split them if you want to. See? In fact, it's actually a lot better if you do split the infinitive, and I'll show you why in just a second. But in case you need some proof about how this old rule about the split infinitive was never actually a rule in the first place, check this out. Sometimes you must split the infinitive. There's no other option, especially when the modifier is a quantifier or a negative. A quantifier is a modifier that answers the question by how much. So for example, in the sentence,
The libertarian expects Bitcoin prices to more than double next year.
the modifier more than must go in the middle position. It wouldn't make sense to say,
The libertarian expects Bitcoin prices more than to double next year.
so with quantifiers like more than, you have to put it in the middle position. There's no other option. And the same thing goes for negatives like not, as in the sentence, she walks carefully to not fall in the water. Or take this cartoon from the New Yorker, I'm moving to France to not get fat. Unlike quantifiers, you can move the negative to the other side of the infinitive, but then the meaning changes. In the middle position, the so-called split infinitive, the quantifier modifies the verb phrase get fat, so it describes her motivation for moving there. But if you move the negative outside the infinitive, it modifies not the verb, but the whole clause. It's like saying, I'm moving to France for other reasons, but getting fat isn't one of them. So to express her intended meaning, we've got to keep the negative right next to the infinitive. But that's perfectly fine because there's no such thing as a split infinitive. Now, if the Star Trek guy were your editor, he would want you to avoid the split infinitive and rewrite those sentences as the libertarian expects that Bitcoin prices will be more than double next year. She walks carefully to avoid falling in the water. I'm moving to France to prevent becoming fat. Now, are these sentences wrong? No, the grammar is fine, but this isn't really a question of grammar, it's a question of style. And to my ear, the split version sounds much better. So there's nothing wrong with split infinitives, and sometimes they're necessary. Nevertheless, modern style guides still advise people, like the Star Trek guy, to avoid split infinitives, even while admitting that there's nothing wrong with them. The Oxford Dictionary of American Usage and Style says that if a split is easily fixed by putting the adverb at the end of the phrase and the meaning remains the same, then avoiding the split is the best course. And Gene Eggenschweiler, who wrote a great book on style and usage, said that splitting an infinitive isn't considered the grammatical sin it used to be, but most careful writers still don't split infinitives unless they have a reason to do so. The thing that gets me about style guides like these is that they never explain why it's better to avoid the split infinitive. And when you start to ask that question, why, you find that there really is no good reason to avoid split infinitives in general. And when writers cling to this superstition against the split infinitive, it causes problems of its own. Let me give you an example. Take a sentence like, for example, just off the top of my head, the thoughtful writer decided to smash the like button. So in this sentence, the infinitive is to smash. And let's say you want to modify that with the adverb quickly. You've got three options. You can put it within the infinitive, which makes the meaning pretty clear. The smashing is done quickly. But let's say you're superstitious about the split infinitive and you want to avoid it. In that case, you can put the modifier before the infinitive. The thoughtful writer decided quickly to smash the like button, or after the infinitive. The thoughtful writer decided to smash the like button quickly. But in either case, you've created a two-way ambiguity. What happened quickly? Did the deciding happen quickly or the smashing happen quickly? You can't tell whether the adverb modifies the infinitive or the whole clause. And the only way to resolve this ambiguity is to put the modifier in the middle of the infinitive, which is fine because there's no such thing as a split infinitive. So it turns out that splitting the infinitive really isn't all that bad. Sometimes it's necessary, and in many cases, it's better. So does this mean that we should always split the infinitive?
What you just said is one of the most insanely idiotic things I have ever heard.
Just kidding, it's a great question. And there are three cases in which it's better to avoid splitting the infinitive. When the modifier is long and heavy, it's better to move it to the end of the verb phrase.
Autumn descends upon the Korean peninsula. Weeks of heavy summer rains and the sudden drop in temperature have changed the rice fields from a lush green to a golden hue, a sign of the harvest to come. But what's this? A stirring in the reeds. An ajoshi. The old man continues to diligently, ardently, patiently, and persistently work.
When you put a long, heavy modifier in the middle of an infinitive, you make the reader do a lot of work just to recognize the infinitive.
The old man continues to work diligently, ardently, patiently, and persistently.
So moving a long, heavy modifier to the end of the verb phrase helps the reader process the information. Second, usually the modifier is just a simple word or phrase that gives us extra information about the infinitive. But when the modifier is the most important piece of the sentence, it's better to give it emphasis by moving it to the end of the verb phrase. For example, take the sentence, "The flight attendant instructed him to properly follow protocols."
If you only made certain to properly follow proper protocols, no such problems would exist.
I think you mean to follow protocols properly.
Properly follow proper protocols.
Moving on. This next one might be a little controversial. And that's because it's not a matter of grammar or meaning, but of what sounds better. And reasonable people can disagree about what sounds natural, but to my ear, quantifiers like never, even, and only sound better next to the infinitive. I'm gonna go through a few example sentences with you, and you can let me know in the comments which one you think sounds better.
Split. The jazz man was called upon to only play Freebird. Unsplit. The jazz man was called upon only to play Freebird. Split. It was disrespectful to even ask the jazz man to play Freebird. Unsplit. It was disrespectful even to ask the jazz man to play Freebird. Split. It would have been better to never have asked the jazz man to play Freebird. Unsplit. It would have been better never to have asked the jazz man to play Freebird.
Personally, I think the non-split version sounds better, but when I ran a poll on my Instagram account, it was pretty much a tie, with 53% of people agreeing that the unsplit version sounds more natural. As Steven Pinker points out, quantifiers seem to naturally flow leftward away from the verb, unsplitting the infinitive. So now we've said that quantifiers like more than require a split infinitive, while quantifiers like never, even, and only sound better without the split infinitive. And besides, are those words even quantifiers? Because I thought quantifiers give us information about the quantity of something, but these words seem more like adverbs of intensity or frequency. I was feeling pretty stuck on these 2 points, so I wrote to the good Dr. Pinker to find out why. He wrote me back. According to Steven Pinker, words like even, never, and only are called quantifiers as a carryover from logic, which refers to the universal quantifier all and the existential quantifier some. Quantification is the process in logic and semantics in which the precise individuals constituting the intended referent of some type are pinned down. In plain English, these words all have the same job. They tell us which member of the noun group we're talking about. But again, if they're all quantifiers, then why would more than require a split infinitive, whereas never, even, and only seem to sound better outside the infinitive? Again, here's Steven Pinker. More than feels more tightly connected to the verb as opposed to the whole clause than even or never. The variability is another example of the major point of chapter 4. There is an inherent tension in syntax between the logical relationship among concepts and the left to right position of words, and the latter is often varied for stylistic and attentional purposes, even if it leads to violations of the former. What Dr. Pinker is helping us see here is that when it comes to writing, style is more important than grammar. That is, even if there are grammatical rules about never splitting an infinitive or quantifiers always requiring a split infinitive, the writer can still make decisions about style and attention that can bend or break these rules. And it's those decisions that gives each writer their own distinctive voice. But now that you know all the ins and outs of the split infinitive, you can make an informed decision about when to split and when not to split that infinitive. And while you're at it, you can check out this video, which is all about common writing mistakes. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one.